some of you, and it looks like we've got a good amount who are here who can enjoy and participate, which is fantastic. I'm Kelly Fornell. I'm the CEO of Tech Manitoba. And this morning I want to respectfully acknowledge that we are meeting virtually on the ancestral lands on Treaty 1 territory, the traditional lands and the meeting place of the Anishinaabe, the Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and is the homeland of the Red River Métis people. I have to say that this morning's speaker, Kelly Thibodeau, is someone that I've known for a number of years, and I have such a huge respect for her knowledge, her work ethic, and her passion, because what she does more than anything is she helps to humanize organizations. And by that, she helps it to make it easier so they can better relate to their employees, their customers, their vendors, their stakeholders, their rights holders. And she's just an all-around, totally passionate and committed individual to all things inclusivity. So I just wanted to say that I'm just so thrilled to start my day with us listening to Kelly. The Manitoba Women in Tech Meetup Series is powered by BDC Capital's Women in Technology and Thrive Venture Funds. The meetup group is a combined force of the passions and energies and talents of ladies at New Media Manitoba, Tech Manitoba, and North Forge Technology Exchange. Together with our allies who are here this morning or perhaps not able to join, we support and share experiences, we applaud accomplishments of each other, and we promote the tech activities in a safe, gender inclusive, and judgment-free environment. Our code of conduct for all events, to summarize and to keep it very, very plainly, is be respectful, be kind, and let's support each other. And I encourage you to review the code of conduct through the link that is located in the right screen, the right-hand side of the screen. The Manitoba Women in Tech is a regular get-together every month, usually the third Wednesday of every month. And it's for anyone working in and with technology, innovation, startups, entrepreneurial, and wants to meet other women who are also passionate about working in tech. We regularly survey our attendees to ensure that the content that we provide for all of the events and the format for the gathering, including times like meeting this morning, work for the majority of the people and also gives another way for people to express their thoughts on the events and speakers. If you are a woman who has a business and you want to scale it up, or you're thinking about addressing a chronic obstacle by launching a tech-enabled business, really, I highly recommend BDC Capital, Women in Tech, and Thrive Venture Funds. Go check out their website. Check out the supports that are available through BDC. There's a lot of information, a lot of great resources, and I think a lot more women should be aware of it so that they understand the options they might have to grow their businesses. By sponsoring Manitoba Women in Tech events, this fund aims to connect women in tech throughout Manitoba to achieve gender equality and promote the advancement of all of us who are working in technology. BDC is generously supporting this meetup group, making the virtual and in-person events possible. So please give a big thank you to BDC. And if you want to learn more, again, check out the details that are placed in the chat. Okay. So circling back to the other Kelly, the main one who's here that you all want to hear from, Kelly Thibodeau. She is a consultant, a trainer, a speaker, and she's been making online marketing make sense for organizations, nonprofits, and industry groups for 25 years plus. She's the founder of Squarely Accessible, a digital accessibility consultancy, and she's a recipient of the inaugural 2022 Manitoba Accessibility Fund Grant. Kelly has been involved in web content accessibility since 2007. She believes that digital experiences are social, and that includes people of all types, all abilities, and that's essential to having a conversation with all. So please welcome Kelly Thibodeau onto the stage. And it always takes a little bit of a moment here to get room.
Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning, Kelly. Good morning. Thank you so much for joining.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me and for that awesome, warm introduction, and for everybody else getting up early and coming and joining me to talk about accessibility. So, yeah.
Okay. Well, I will hop off the stage, Kelly, and it is all yours. So please take it away.
Great. All right. Thank you so much. And as Kelly mentioned, so you might have known my work previously under Squarely Social, and I'm very excited to share that I have now going through a brand evolution, and so Squarely Accessible is the new company and brand name that I'm operating under. All right, so let me just get my screen going and we'll take it from there. Okay, so one of the things that I want to mention about Remo, particularly if you are looking for closed captions, on the chat window on the very right side, you'll see something that says CC, and you can turn on captions for another way to take in the information from today. As well, I'm going to turn on captions on my Google Slides show. And so I would encourage you that if you are doing a presentation somewhere, whether that's online or in person, that you do that as well. So, and I also just really want to, so I don't know if you can see the things coming up on my screen, but the way that you do that in Google Slides, if you click the little three dots, go to captions preferences and turn that on. And now you'll see some auto captions generated as I'm sharing some information with you this morning. I will say these, because these are auto generated, they're not necessarily going to be 100% accurate, but another great way for people to take in information. So let me get going. So on our agenda today, we're going to talk about what digital accessibility is and why it's important, the standards under the Accessibility for Manitobans Act, so the legislation behind accessibility, and 6 ways that you can immediately start making your organization's website and social media content more accessible. So whether you're doing that on behalf of an organization or thinking about experimenting with some things in your personal social media or website content, there'll be some really great takeaways for you after today's presentation. So I also really like to start just with a little bit of framing, a little bit of reference about inclusion, particularly, and my philosophy, the philosophy that I've baked into the way that I operate my business, and to just share some thoughts there. So I'll just start with first. I really believe that content can't be conversational until it's inclusive. And I believe that conversations are deeper and more meaningful by bringing diverse people and perspectives together. We also believe that practice makes permanent. So you're going to hear me say that a lot. It's not about perfection and getting it right. It's just that start that really is the place to think about what do you want to do next. So small starts are better than not starting at all. And no single person has all the answers. And that learning, unlearning, and course correcting are all part of our collective journeys as we work towards our collective good. So, don't worry about that idea of I can't do anything until I get it completely right. That's certainly not the way that I look at the work and not the things that have been part of my experience. I'm learning as much, right? Every day I learn more. And I think that's a really exciting place to be. Also, we stand with all BIPOC, disabled, 2S, LGBTQIA+, and all underrepresented communities, and we're committed to creating safe spaces where we can all thrive. I also want to acknowledge personally that I'm aware of my privilege as a white, straight, cisgendered, able-bodied woman, and I acknowledge that not everybody shares the same privilege and the same systems that continue to benefit me are not always designed to benefit everyone. And I also believe that as a person with privilege, I'm both capable of and responsible for helping to change that, which is why I'm here today. So I really like to start as well. So a few different things that you know about me. This is a picture of my mom. And so my work in accessibility is personal for me. This is my mom. Her name is Marlene Greenwood, and she passed away in 2017. But she had a neurological disease that affected her speech, her balance, and her coordination. And as you can see in this picture, my mom used a wheelchair. And so my passion for accessibility is really inspired by her. Her disease was progressive. She didn't always use a wheelchair. But I watched, as her disease progressed, I watched her world become slowly more and more inaccessible to her. Everything from shopping at Walmart to watching her not be able to play her favorite computer games anymore, simply because she didn't have the access. So I know that digital accessibility gets a bad rap, and sometimes it's seen as boring, arduous, and onerous. And I also know that I am not the only person in this room that knows or loves someone who is disabled. So I want you to think about that person in our session today. And you are in the best place to help bring about change for those people. I want you to be inspired to try something new and to be curious about content accessibility. I work in marketing and I totally get it. By the time you finish doing all the things that you're supposed to be doing to keep up with changing platforms, algorithms, publishing, it can be a long list and a long process. So, this is your invitation to make a habit stick. Follow your curiosity, and together we can help make the world a more accessible place. And I also want you to think differently about accessibility. So often we think about accessibility in the context of disability, but it's really for everybody. Inclusive design benefits everyone. So let's start with a poll. Shaylin, if you can help me out with this one. So I'm curious to know, how would you rate your digital accessibility knowledge coming into today's presentation? So we have options. So polls are, again, in that main chat panel on the far right side. So from 1 to 5, 1, this is completely new for me. 2, I've started to hear more about it. 3, I'm actively looking to learn more. 4, I'm ready to be a change maker. Or 5, I'm an advocate. So curious to know where you're starting from. Okay, I see some change makers, some who are starting to hear more about it, which is awesome. And thank you so much for being here this morning on an early morning. Okay, lots of change makers in the room. So that's fantastic. I'm happy to be in very, very good company. Let's also start by talking about language, because some of these conversations may feel a little sensitive, maybe feel a little bit uncomfortable. And so I know there's lots of, good um, spirit involved in wanting to think about language and using what seems appropriate. So in as far as disability community goes, there's person first. So that's when you read things like people with disabilities. It's what the government of Canada generally has standardized on. And but there's no right or wrong. So the other frame is identity first or disabled people. And within disability communities, there's some preference there, but it really comes down to a personal choice and a personal opinion. So if you're working with someone in a one-on-one capacity, the best thing to do is ask them what their preference is in terms of person first or identity first. You'll hear me use both interchangeably, and that's the reason why. So the most important thing is to be educated and informed about the language that you're using. And if you're not sure, then ask somebody on an individual level and know that their personal experience doesn't necessarily represent the entire group. The other numerim that you may see from time to time is at the bottom of the slide. So that's A11Y. And so that is a short form for the word accessibility, because there are 11 letters between the word A and the word Y. So if you see both of those interchangeably, that's a short form for accessibility. Let's talk about some types of disabilities. This is a really, really simplified diagram out of the Microsoft Inclusive Design methodologies. And I want you to expand your thinking about disability. So people with disabilities are actually the world's largest minority group. And in Canada, 1 out of 5 people have identified themselves as disabled. In Manitoba, that number is higher. It's about 1 in 4. I'll also say that we have been conditioned to see disability as visible, mostly as people in wheelchairs. Think about accessible parking signs, right? You're looking for that blue symbol with somebody in a wheelchair. Yet over 80% of disabilities are invisible, which means you can't always tell when someone is disabled. And as we age, the chances of disability go up. 38% of working age adults over the age of 65 identify as disabled. And that's according to a 2017 Stats Canada survey. So that's old data, but it's the most current one we have. So it's likely even higher than that. As well, that survey really depended on people to self-disclose that they had a disability, and not everybody wants to do that. So when you think about types of disabilities, there's 3 categories on this slide. So there's permanent, temporary, and situational. Permanent is something that you can't change. So in this example, maybe somebody who has 1 arm, they can't change that. That is something that they have throughout their lifetime. As well, sort of on the sort of cognitive side, dyslexia could be considered a disability because it affects how you interpret language and letters. And temporary, so a temporary situation, the first example, it might be holding a baby, you can't use your other arm because who knows how long you've been up with that crying baby and now they're finally asleep and you don't want to put them down. Temporary on the cognitive side, maybe you just didn't get a good amount of sleep last night and your thinking capacity, your mental capacity isn't quite where it might normally be. And then situational, maybe your arm is broken, but you'll recover from that injury. So it's also the only minority group that you can enter and then leave throughout your lifetime and your experience. Or situational, you could be dealing with loss. So there are different categories of disability and intersections of them as well. So this one sort of covers some quick examples, but you can also think about visual disabilities, hearing disabilities, physical disabilities, motor and cognitive as well in just looking at people's experience. I would say as well, so not necessarily, again, I want to come back to that principle of inclusive design benefits everyone, right? When you think about yourself in a noisy place or a quiet place, there are different ways that you want to interpret information that isn't, that can be context dependent. So what is web accessibility? So this is a definition from the Web Accessibility Initiative. And it says that web accessibility means that websites, tools, and technologies are designed and developed so people with disabilities can use them. And more specifically, so that people can perceive, understand, navigate, and interact with the web and contribute to the web. So have that same experience without barriers. And why it's important. So there's the business side of accessibility and there's the human side. Think about what would it be like to experience the internet with only a keyboard and not have a mouse? Do you think that you could do it? So accessible social media and websites ensure that all of your potential audience, including people with disabilities, have a consistent user experience and are able to easily access your information. And this stat that follows that says it's estimated that consumer companies with inaccessible websites and digital strategies lose $6.9 billion every year as frustrated disabled consumers take their business to competitors. Now that is pre-COVID, right? So it's likely even more than that. In fact, McKinsey's 2022 Global Digital Sentiment Survey found that consumers are interacting digitally with twice as many industries as they were before the COVID-19 pandemic. And according to the WebAIM Million Report, in 2023, 96.3% of the internet's top 1 million homepages have accessibility problems. So you might think that the big brands sort of have it all figured out and have this down pat. And the truth is that's just not the case. It's important and it's a big, big problem. So another poll, what do you know about Manitoba's accessibility legislation? Shaylin, if you want to put that up, I'd be curious to know who's coming in with knowledge around the legislation. So our options, number one, not much. Number two, I'm familiar with it. Number three, leaders at my company are talking about it. Or number four, we're changing our policies and practices at work. Okay, so some not much, which is great. I don't profess to be an expert in the legislation, but I definitely have some information to share about legislation. Some that are familiar with it, companies talking about it, yeah, policies and practices. So the Manitoba accessibility legislation has been around since it became law in December 2013. And there are a few standards within the Act. So the one that we're really focused on for today's presentation is the Information and Communication Standard. And it came into effect on May 1st, 2022. And then so the purpose of the standard is to address barriers faced by people accessing information in print, in person, on websites, and in other formats. And not complying with legislation carries financial, legal, and reputational risk. And while it opens the doors to conversation, honestly, it's not the most important reason. It's unfortunate that the right thing to do isn't necessarily enough to move people to action. So that's why we have legislation. And legislation is inconsistent across Canada. It's been in the US for longer, the Americans with Disabilities Act. And then globally, there is also different levels of legislation in place. So it's really about putting action behind your company's values in one of the most public facing ways. And it's about creating digital equity so that everybody has access to the same experience and information when they want and need it and without any barriers. So I will say as well, it's important, right? If your web and social media content is accessible, then your products and services need to be accessible. You want to make sure that you're not letting down expectations on one over the other. I would also say, the marketer in me would tell you that nobody wants to leave 25% of their audience out. And creating accessible web and social media content today is a competitive differentiator in today's marketplace. And so here's the dates for compliance with the standard that have been set through the Manitoba legislation. So the Manitoba government really wanted to set themselves out as a leader and comply by May 1st, 2023. Of course, that date has come and gone now, but exciting to see them leading the way in creating more accessible online experience. Public sector organizations, library and educational institutions, their compliance deadline is May 1st, 2024. And essentially for everybody else, so private sector, nonprofit orgs, and small municipalities must comply by May 1st, 2025. It's also important to know that the Human Rights Code actually could override the legislation. So even though your deadline might not be until 2024 or 2025, somebody could still complain through the Human Rights Code, and there could be some cost or consequences to your organization. So now let's talk about WCAG, which is an acronym that stands for the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. And they were developed through the World Wide Web Consortium, or W3C, Web Accessibility Initiative. That is a lot of W's for this time of the morning. And individuals, as well as individuals and organizations around the world, to define how to make web content accessible to disabled people. The guidelines themselves are really full of a lot of technical jargon. They're not easy to understand. There's layers of complexity that comply to or that apply to multiple disciplines. Version 2.1 level AA compliance is the common standard today and most often cited in legislation. So there are both versions and levels of WCAG. Version 2.0 was actually developed in 2008. And so that's, we're still working with a version. We're now up to 2.1. 2.2 has been drafted and is due out to be released this year. Version 3 is in development, but it could be a decade away. So the thing about WCAG is it's backwards compatible. So every time a new version comes out, the previous version still applies and it layers over top, which is why it involves a lot of consultation and strategy in putting new guidelines together. So typically it's version 2.1 level AA, which is a common standard. I also want to share that accessibility is everybody's job. So we're here to talk about writing and content. We're going to talk a little bit about design, but accessible user experience is that intersection between content and design and code. So on the web, right, you want to make sure that your HTML is accessible. On social, we have less control over code in the background, but just an understanding that you can have the most accessible content, but if you have inaccessible design and inaccessible code, it's not an accessible user experience. So you may be leading conversations or influencing conversations with others in different disciplines. And it's important to know that it really is not just one person's job. Okay, so let's dig into the six ways to start. And I'll breeze through these a little quickly just to make sure that we stay on time. But, some things that you might be doing already, thinking about differently, curious to know more about. So first is hashtags. And I'm just going to leave this one sit right here for just a second. And maybe you can give me some reactions in Remo based on what you think you're reading. I see a few giggles. I see some things. Yes, exactly. Where are the words in this hashtag, right? So how about this? probably looks a little bit different. So this is known as camel case. So first thing that you could start doing uh, right now, if you're sharing content on social, honestly, or in the next hour or the next day, whenever you're putting out the next LinkedIn post or Instagram post or caption, anything like that, camel case your hashtags. So initial caps on every letter of every first word. It's the first reason to do that is so that screen readers will read that as separate words to people who use. So screen readers are assistive technology that some people with disabilities will use to help them interpret information online. Screen readers are not just limited to blind or low vision people. It can also be used by people maybe with autism or ADHD, people that um, are just wanting another way to take on information online. It doesn't change anything about the hashtag. It doesn't change how searchable it is. It doesn't change anything other than making it easier to read for screen readers, for people with disabilities, and for everybody. So we all know that this is about Susan's album party and not the thing that you thought you were reading before. Yeah. Okay, next is alt text or alternative text, and that's text that describes an image to someone who uses a screen reader. Alt text isn't usually visible on your website, so your website visitors won't see it, or in your social media content. It's more a behind the scenes thing that gets picked up by those screen readers. And if it gets left blank, then it's like the image was never there in the first place. So when you need alt text on nearly every social media image. And now the major social media platforms do allow you to put alt text. And you can also go back and edit alt text if you missed it in an earlier post. So, and almost all website images. So think about how you might communicate information to somebody who couldn't see that image. Or sometimes, honestly, like the security settings for your organization. I know it happens in Outlook all the time where images break and they don't get seen. And I sent out a newsletter last week. Image looked fine in the program. And then when I sent it out, it was broken in my email. So there was alt text there to explain a little bit more about what that image was meant to communicate. And when you don't need alt text, so you don't need alt text for decorative images on the web. So think about things like line breaks or other sort of background patterns, things like that. And you don't need alt text for emojis because it's actually included with the code for the emoji itself. So you don't have to add alt text to that. So here's an example. So I have a photo of a cat here sitting on a brown couch. And it's really about communicating information in the context that you're trying to share it in. So I want to just show you a few different ways that you could use alt text to explain what's going on in this image. So first, if it's about the cat, I might say, this is Joey, an adorable black, orange, and calico cat with green eyes, relaxing on a couch with one white front paw tucked under. If instead I want to talk about the couch, I could say it's a cat sitting on a custom-made soft brown suede sofa with a green cushion slightly offset in the background. Or if this is about the wall, I could say it's a cat sitting on a couch in front of a beige wall painted in our most popular warm neutral tone October Mist, Benjamin Moore 2022 color of the year. Now, certainly with different focal points on this particular image, you could probably think it's more about the cat. The important thing is to be succinct and descriptive. So if the alt text for this image was simply cat, that's probably not enough to explain why I'm using the image or what context it's appropriate in. So thinking creatively, right? When you are in the mode of creating content, that's when it's the best time to think about something like alt text. Next is emojis. So as far as emojis go, it's better to use the actual emoji than the emoticon symbol because screen readers don't read punctuation. So if you just use an emoticon, it's like it's not even there. So instead, use the actual emoji. Keep them to the end of the sentence. So remember, screen readers read emojis out loud. So if it's at the beginning of the sentence, it may not always contextually make sense. So keep it at the end. And stick to one or two. If your comment on a social media post is a string full of emojis that's meant to convey some something, that some concept or some feeling or something like that, it's probably not going to make sense if you literally read the description for every single emoji. And that would be the experience for somebody who uses a screen reader. And also check the description on Emojipedia. So Emojipedia is a website you can go to and look up all the emojis and more that you ever wanted. But if you want to use a specific emoji for a particular purpose, make sure the actual description of it matches so that when that text is read out loud by a screen reader, it's the same thing that you had intended to communicate. Next is link text. So this is a website particularly. It's important to use descriptive text that matches the destination. And I love this idea of a link is a promise. This came from Jerry McGovern, who's a web usability guy that's been around forever from Ireland. Fantastic sort of thought leader in the industry. And so I think about the promise, right? When somebody clicks on a link, you want the what they click on to match the destination. So it reinforces that mental model. And I think, oh, yes, I landed where I expected to. So in this example, cook a quick, easy, and then the link text is 1 pot feta cheese and pasta recipe for dinner tonight. And when I click that, I expect to go to a page titled 1 pot feta cheese and pasta recipe. Instead, sometimes the conventions that you see are things like click here and learn more. And so they're vague because they don't tell anybody about where they're going. It's a common convention, but for a screen reader that will only read links out loud, it doesn't give me any context. So click here, what does that mean? Just think about if you couldn't interpret the rest of that sentence and you only had the links to guide you, click here and learn more, read more, or in my opinion, the 5 most wasted words on the internet, click here to learn more. Challenge yourself to use more descriptive link text. This is a good usability practice and an excellent accessibility practice as well. Next is visuals. So fonts, color contrast, and text size. Again, you may be creating your own visuals to use in social media or on the web, or you may be working with a design team who does it as well. So this is an example of where conversations would go back and forth. Stick to plain fonts that are easy to read. In social particularly, it's really easy to see a bunch of people doing things that sort of reinforces this idea that it must be cool and okay. And often those are like tiny little fonts or scripty fonts that are fancy. Really just stick to those plain fonts and make it as easy to read as possible. Think about those visuals as more of a billboard and less of an information poster. So use a high contrast or a black background, avoid those decorative fonts, and choose larger, more recognizable fonts. So here's a few examples. In the one on the left, you can see, and so these are actual screenshots. I save this stuff all the time because I see it everywhere, and I really want to have a good library to show other people. So the one on the left, beautiful, beautiful picture of a sunset on the beach in Aruba. Tiny little text on the bottom, right? That is hard to read. You have to really want to pay attention to it. And you have to count on the fact that somebody might have the ability to use their thumb to tap and hold it down. So make that text bigger and put a background on it to make it easier to read. The second one, so the thing that is problematic with that one is that it's all caps, first of all, which is harder to read. And it's using a font that has a multiple like variations of strokes, so thin and thick, which also makes it difficult to read. So better to instead use a different font on a plainer background. And then the last one, there's not enough color contrast here. So it's a schedule for appointment availability on a leafy background with a light green layer over top and some text that again is really, really difficult to read. So instead, think about how you can simplify your visuals and make it easier for people to read and interpret and consume online. Okay, and then web content structure. So if you're creating your own website, you might be thinking more about visuals in terms of like heading levels and things like that. Maybe you prefer one style over another simply because you like the aesthetics better. You like the font better, the size, the color. What that can do is actually sort of mess up the hierarchy of the information on the page. So important to instead use heading 1 first and only one heading 1 per page as the main title, then heading 2 for subheadings and heading 3 under that. So change those font attributes rather than using different heading styles. The thing that's important there is that screen readers pick up heading one as the main title on the page and then use that hierarchy to keep navigating through the page. It's as well really good for search engine optimization. There's a couple things actually, the descriptive link text and the heading hierarchy, because heading one is the major signal to Google about what your page content is about. So there's beautiful intersection between accessibility, usability, and searchability or findability in terms of online content. You are really doing a lot of work that benefits your company and your content in many, many different ways. So you might be thinking, okay, maybe you're a little overwhelmed. Maybe you found some things that were new. Maybe you want to try some things. So how do you make that stick? Because I know there's a lot of pressure, right? Like once you know something different, to do something different. And this is my philosophy and my approach. I mentioned it at the top of our presentation, is that practice makes permanent. So I would love for you to share one thing in chat with each other about what's one thing that you're curious about and you want to try, or something that stuck with you that you want to start doing a little bit differently. Some things that you can try as well. If you have an iPhone, you actually have a screen reader right in your pocket. You can use VoiceOver, turn that on, see what happens. If you have an Android, you can use Google Talkback. Try browsing the web without your mouse or using only your keyboard, but don't let perfection get in the way. Take action and keep taking action. It's better to try one thing and it will happen. It's happened to me, right? You try one thing, you remember the first time, you forget the second time, you remember a little bit later, or you publish it and you're for sure, you're confident that you wrote the alt text, you camel case the hashtags, and then whatever technical gremlins get in the way and it all undoes itself, right? Like have some grace for yourself and for each other as you're trying these new things. The important thing is that you keep going. Adopt a learning mindset and let curiosity lead the way and start talking about it. So a couple things that are coming up next in terms of things that I'm doing in my business under Squarely Accessible. I'm running the social media and website content accessibility class. It's on May 24th and 25th from 9 o'clock to 11:30 each day. And so it's 5 hours of training that's really designed to take a deeper dive into more things around online content accessibility. It's $350 plus GST. And you can use that QR code, or there's a link there if that's a better way to get to that information. So all of that is available on my website. And as well, I've just put together this new offer called the Accessibility Starter Kit, because I recognize that sometimes it's hard to sort of get that start. So this service is really designed to give you an accessibility brand brush up and package that with some one-on-one coaching over a 4-week period. And the regular price for that is $3,500 plus GST. But if you sign up before July 1st, you'll get that for half off at $1,750 plus GST. So that's one-on-one customized help specific for your brand. So we'll look at things like brand colors and color contrast and font pairings and things like that, and then put together a 3-week plan around coaching to help you bring some of those concepts into your everyday practices. And I'm also excited to share that tomorrow is Global Accessibility Awareness Day. So there's all kinds of online events happening. So go to Google Global Accessibility Awareness Day and check out the events and keep learning. Keep learning from knowledge, from experts in the industry and people who are really making change in accessibility. So thank you so much for your time. That's the end of what I wanted to share today. And curious, Kelly, if you want to take a look, maybe we can just have a little bit of time for Q&A if we have time for that.
I'm coming, I promise you.
All good. All good.
Here's my accessibility issue. I can't get my camera link to work, so
Oh no.
I will just keep trying. That was great. So Kelly, despite my camera not working, like again, folks who are listening and watching in, let's give Kelly a round of applause, because I think that was a tremendously helpful and really interesting presentation filled with lots of great information. So thank you very, very much, Kelly, for doing that.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. So I just think this is so interesting. Clearly, it's my laptop or my internet's in a Wednesday funk here, not wanting to go. We have quite a few questions, so you know, if you're, as you said, you seem to be okay with it. I think we're okay for time. I'm going to
Mm,
scroll and see. There's a question about cost. So
okay.
a few people have asked, is it, it says, isn't doing accessibility properly really expensive? So there's a concern there for cost. What are your
Hmm.
thoughts on that, Kelly?
Yeah, so if you're looking at accessibility as retrofitting something that is already up and running, it is can be quite expensive, right? To sort of rework and get something to be accessible that wasn't before. And redoing something like a website can be a significant cost. The thing about accessibility is that as you sort of get more awareness, it feels like a heavier lift at the end of the process, but when you think about it from the beginning, it reduces cost over time. So there's investment of time, investment of dollars for sure. It really depends on what your goals are and walking through that carefully to then bring that reality to life. Oh, yeah, there you are. Oh, and now we can't hear you.
Are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Sorry about that, folks.
Hmm.
Okay, so there's a question here around design. A person feels that many accessible designs aren't very attractive, and they don't want a site that's unattractive. So, what might they do?
Hmm. Well, I think it's a bit of a myth buster that accessible websites honestly can't be beautiful. And designers, developers, anybody in the creative industry, we work within constraints all the time. So the constraints, the design constraints about accessibility actually help you produce a better, more creative result. So there's no need to compromise what you might want aesthetically and compromise the accessibility around that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
that's my, yeah, core really belief and approach in looking at accessibility. There's no reason that beauty has to take a back seat.
Absolutely. And I just had a look at your website as well, Kelly, and I think it looks stunning. It is
Oh, thank
so
you.
clean. I feel like most websites nowadays are very much like a marketing, a glossy brochure that's put online, and they're not always easy to navigate and find information. And looking through with yours, I thought it was incredibly brilliant to navigate. And
Mm,
if we could go back to, sites that are a little bit more pared back, um,
mhm.
that could be this could be the new trend that becomes more of the ongoing standard, which would be wonderful.
Absolutely. The other thing that I would say is it's really important to involve disabled people in web design, development, and in testing. And I did that with my website. I worked with folks from CNIB Frontier Accessibility. Ashley Lodge, who's here with us today, she was a fundamental change maker in the work of bringing that to life. And as somebody who's an able-bodied person, I I really believe that it's not my place to determine when something is accessible. It's only through working with people with that have that lived experience. Yeah.
Absolutely. So there's
Mhm.
one of the questions here relates to knowing someone's audience. And so you and I have had this conversation about, is it about the disability? Is it about the technology? And so the question is, or perhaps it's a
Mhm.
bit more of a statement, disabled people don't use my product or service, so I don't have to do this stuff, right?
So I'd be curious to know how you know or what is feeding into sort of that view around disabled people don't use your product or service, because we think about disability as this sort of like far reaching fringe or this extra layer on top of people that we're already working with. And like I said, sort of those categories of disability. So chances are, when you think about like 1 in 5 Canadians are identified as disabled, people are using your product. And if people aren't using your product, it's because it's inaccessible, and so they've gone somewhere else.
Yeah, absolutely. And I found it interesting too, like you had mentioned before, I think in a previous conversation, where, a lot of times people might have the visuals turned off. And so you're really
Mhm.
just wanting the audio for something. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you have a disability, but you might be in an area where, low bandwidth. In my
Yeah,
occasion here, same sort of thing, right?
yeah.
The video component was just too much for my bandwidth at the moment. So closed captioning or audio, incredibly helpful in situations like that.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Here's a really interesting one. Are there any award programs celebrating sites following these principles, these standards?
There are some certification programs through an organization called the International Association for Accessibility Professionals. So I don't know that they award websites necessarily. Um, the other thing that I'll say is that don't wait for the applause, right? If you start making your online content and presence more accessible, people with disabilities are not going to stand up and cheer, right? That's the expectation. Accessibility is the baseline. So there may be sort of industries that are recognizing different elements of accessibility, but that is really the starting point, not the polish on the end.
Okay.
Mhm.
If a link is a descriptive, how does the screen reader know it's a link? They say that they have many older people who don't know a link without telling them. So just wondering a little bit more if you've got some insight in terms of how that works.
That's interesting. So you might have to, for your audience, you might have to start shifting and talking about what you're doing and why so that they know rather than sticking with that click here or learn more convention. So it's the HTML code behind the scenes that signals that it's a link. And a real lesson through my website, honestly, I had a link that just said subscribe. And to me, it was sort of implied that you would subscribe to my newsletter. But through that lived user experience testing with CNIB Frontier, they said when the link text is read out loud, subscribe isn't descriptive enough. So instead to change that to subscribe to the newsletter so that it was clear about what was going to happen when somebody clicked that link.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Don't make assumptions that it's clear. Add a
Yes.
little bit
Yeah.
more. Absolutely.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Good to know. I would also say too that so there's a question here about, do you offer training to social media staff to learn more about making social accounts more accessible? Absolutely. As Kelly had said, she's got a
Mhm.
program May 24th and 25th. Registration information is listed on her website, Squarely Accessible. So please check that out. She also has like one of the best newsletters that I follow in terms of that blend of useful information, humor, cultural relevancy. It's just a great newsletter, and I highly recommend it because she has all sorts of really great examples relating to accessibility and how to make your online content inclusive for everyone. So yeah,
Yeah.
highly recommend subscribing to her newsletter. And in terms of here, a little plug for Tech Manitoba for the person that sent in the question about working with some older folks who may not know how to um, identify a link. We have digital literacy classes for free. And so many of those upcoming classes can be in person for older adults. So if you're interested in knowing more about that, get in contact with me or the program manager, Paula Canis, and we can connect you with her to get something going perhaps with your audience if you want specific training around foundational digital literacy training
Mhm.
for free. Okay, so I'll take one more question, and let's see. What might be a good one here. Here we go. Here's one that's a little bit more design related from Kate. Is it a good practice to create website mode for high contrast like black and white or black yellow?
As opposed to like as an alternate layer, I think is the sort of the thing that I'm thinking about. But
Mhm.
ideally, it would be the same experience for everybody. So if you're thinking about color contrast, use a color contrast checker online and plug those colors in and make sure that they meet the criteria. That's certainly something that we practice in the course for sure. I have seen some websites that sort of flip between light mode and dark mode so that for people who prefer that experience, if the website is optimized for that. But yeah, it's really important to just use the color contrast checker and think about that same experience for everybody. And the the idea around we're building towards digital equity rather than creating fragmented experiences for specific groups.
Absolutely. And I would say as
Mm.
well, like in terms of thinking about like costing and why should I, and all these types of things. Like, we know it's the right thing to do. You've explained, the 6 ways to make the website more accessible, which is incredibly practical. I love the camel case, your hashtags. I find personally LinkedIn sometimes always wants to revert it back to all lowercase.
Mm,
And I'm like, no, no, no,
right.
LinkedIn, please keep
Yes.
what I
Yeah.
put in there. So be persistent with that and the other tips that Kelly has very much provided. So again, Kel, I just want to say thank you so much for helping us to start our day. Your presentation was fantastic. And for more information, everyone, go to squarelyaccessible.com. Thank you for joining us. Please, please, if you have time, complete the quick survey that's on the right side of the screen. If there is a presenter you think would be a good fit for future discussions, feel free to nominate them and pass on that information through the survey. Just want to say as well that mark your calendars, because June 21st, summer solstice, is the mixer, which will be in person at 6 o'clock, BDC office, 242 Hargrave. So it's a rooftop patio that they have at their lovely, lovely location. Catering by Chef Kelly Catani, olive oil sampling with fresh colio, and of course, there'll be a cash bar. So come celebrate the start of summer with us, June 21st. Thank you, Executive Committee for Manitoba Women in Tech, for making today's presentation with Kelly Thibodeau from Squarely Social / Squarely Accessible possible. Thank you for BDC for making these events possible. And thank you to you, everyone, for joining us this morning. See you next time. And I think Remo will be open for another 20 minutes if you want to stick around and have more conversations with those who are here. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, Kelly.
Thank you. And I also just want to say shout out to Ashley for dropping all the knowledge in the chat. So awesome to have you here.
Yes.
All right.